At Christmas breakfast, my mom smiled and said, "You'll understand when you deserve more than an envelope." So I took the one thing they cherished most, and Christmas morning at my parents' place always looked like it belonged on the cover of some catalog that forgot about reality: pine-scented air, blinking lights, cinnamon rolls burning faintly on the edges just like every year. My mom, Linda, floated around the house in a velvet cranberry robe like she was the hostess of a winter royal court. She'd spent the last 30 Christmases making sure we remembered the details, the smell, the timing, the performance. Everything had its place, including people. And I knew exactly where mine was. The thermostat was set to 74, but my dad, Gerald, still insisted on lighting the fireplace, grumbling something about ambience and tradition, as though anyone had asked. Meanwhile, my sister Eliza arrived fashionably late as always, hair curled to perfection, wearing a blush cashmere lounge set that probably cost more than my rent. She hugged herself theatrically the second she stepped inside, like the room owed her warmth and applause for showing up. The tree blinked from the corner of the room, decked in the same gold bulbs we'd used since I was 5. I could trace every crack in the hand-painted ornaments, chips on the ceramic deer, frayed ends of ribbon bows that once sat on Barbie boxes and train sets. It was all still here, frozen like some snow globe version of my childhood that only showed the pretty angles. We didn't talk about the burned parts, the skipped birthdays, the year I made my own cupcakes because no one else remembered. Linda had a box in her hands, gold paper with satin ribbon tied so perfectly you'd think a store clerk had done it. She turned to Eliza with this glow in her cheeks, smile spreading wide like she was delivering a sacred blessing. "Go ahead, baby, open it," she cooed. Eliza let out one of her signature gasps, like she just heard she got cast in a Netflix holiday special. She hadn't even touched the ribbon yet, but she already knew how to play her part. She always did. Every gesture rehearsed, every reaction tailored for effect. If you ask me, she missed her calling in soap operas. She peeled the ribbon slowly, savoring the moment like it was an edible truffle, not gift wrap. Inside was a small velvet box, the kind you expect engagement rings to live in. She opened it and shrieked so loud I swear the dog barked 3 doors down. It was a silver key, neatly nestled in black satin like it was made of moonlight and miracles. "Oh my God," she squealed, clutching the key like it could float off. "Is this what I think it is?" My father's face was already forming the grin I knew too well, the one he reserved for clients and Eliza, never me. "We bought her a home in Asheville," Linda said, her voice breaking a little like she'd just announced Eliza won the Nobel Prize in being perfect. "Something charming, near the water, with space for a home studio and a reading nook." Eliza threw her arms around both of them like she was being reunited after war. I smiled, but it wasn't joy, it was muscle memory, the kind you build after decades of learning when to nod and pretend you're not disappearing. Linda turned toward me with her voice lowered and eyes too soft to mean nothing. "You'll understand someday," she said, like wisdom only came wrapped in debt and favoritism. Then came my gift. No fanfare, no gold ribbon, no smile. Gerald just leaned over from his leather chair and dropped an envelope in my lap like he was passing a tax form. "Here you go," he muttered. No eye contact, no explanation. I didn't open it right away. It just sat there, heavy for something made of paper. I already knew it wasn't good. There's a particular silence that wraps around you when a family tries to make indifference look like equality. It was the kind of silence that made you question whether speaking up would make you seem ungrateful, dramatic, or worse, right? I ran my finger along the edge of the flap, pausing just before lifting it. My name was scribbled in Linda's familiar looping cursive, the same one she used on every Christmas tag since 1993. There was no sticker, no stamp, no sense of occasion, just my name, like a reminder that I was lucky to even be here. The envelope held one sheet of paper. A job listing, administrative assistant, entry level, regional insurance office in Detroit. No handwritten note, just a typed URL and, at the bottom, a line in Gerald's sharp, all caps handwriting. "Thought this might be more your speed." I blinked, staring at the page like it might shift into something kinder. It didn't. Meanwhile, Eliza was still holding her house key up to the light, letting it catch the reflection of the Christmas bulbs while Linda gushed about granite countertops and walk-in closets. I could barely hear them. The envelope was screaming in my lap, silent but unmistakable. This wasn't a mistake. This was how they saw me. And maybe, just maybe, how they always had. I didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't make a scene. I just slid the paper back into the envelope, folded it twice, and tucked it under my leg. Not to hide it, but to end it. Because in that moment, surrounded by tinsel and noise and a performance no one had asked me to join, I knew one thing without doubt. I was not one of them. Not really. I was the one who packed my own boxes when I moved out, who called the dentist and made her own birthday dinner, who fixed broken things without announcing it. And this plain envelope with a job link, was their reward for my independence. They didn't give me less because they forgot. They gave me less because they believed I needed less. Because I'd never needed saving the way Eliza did. Because I'd never made a scene. Because I never asked. But I was done pretending that didn't matter. By Saturday afternoon, the holiday haze had mostly worn off, and the living room smelled like leftover roast and fake cheer. Gerald sat in his chair with the same paper he'd been pretending to read all morning, while Linda folded napkins like they were origami and talked to herself about storage bins and whether Eliza's boyfriend would propose before Valentine's Day. Eliza wasn't even there, off to a spa weekend with her branding coach in Sedona, but somehow she was still the main character in every sentence. We'd finished the post-Christmas checklist, lifting boxes from the attic, sorting through ornaments, and pretending we were bonding. It was all so rehearsed I could practically hear the lines before they said them. I could have driven home then, made an excuse about work or exhaustion or my cat's anxiety meds, but something held me in place, something that didn't feel like guilt anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. The guest room still had my old track medals hung on bent nails and a bookshelf lined with paperbacks I'd once begged them to read. The walls had been repainted, a muted beige that tried too hard to be warm, but the silence inside them was the same. It wrapped around me like insulation, thick, quiet, unforgiving. Around midnight, I wandered through the house barefoot, careful not to creak the wrong floorboard. I passed the kitchen where the coffee pot blinked like it was keeping watch, past the hallway photos all updated to include Eliza's latest beach shoots and those awkward professional shots Linda insisted on sending every year. Then I noticed something strange. The door to Gerald's office was ajar. That door was never open. Not when we were kids, not even during tax season. It was his shrine of order, a space we were only allowed to enter if summoned. But there it was now, unlocked, cracked just wide enough to feel like an invitation or a mistake. I hesitated, then stepped closer. The lights were off, but the hallway glow stretched far enough to reveal what I didn't expect to see. The file cabinet was slightly pulled out, and just behind it, a small gray safe with its door wide open. I should have turned around. Should have assumed it was nothing. Should have whispered, "Not my business," and gone back to bed. But something in me refused to move. A part of me I didn't know I still had. Something curious, tired, and ready to stop swallowing. I crouched slowly, pulse thick in my ears. Inside the safe were rows of manila folders, stacked with military precision. Each one labeled in Gerald's blocky handwriting. Tax, deed, trust, insurance, Eliza, Darla. I flipped past the ones I recognized, drawn to the one with my name. At the bottom of the stack was a sealed white envelope with words scrawled in permanent ink, to be opened upon my death. Gerald had never been poetic, but something about the phrasing chilled me. My hands went still. Then, without really deciding to, I opened it. Inside was a legal will, notarized and recent. This wasn't the one I remembered. The one from when I turned 25 and Linda made a show of reading it at the dinner table, describing how everything would be fairly divided, because that's what family does. This one was newer, and very different. The first name listed was mine, but next to it wasn't a percentage or a vague inheritance. It was a property parcel number. I blinked at it, confused. Then I turned the page and felt the air in the room change. It was a deed, a full property deed. A small 2-bedroom cabin on a wooded lake in Grand Haven, purchased 6 years ago. And it was in my name. I stared at it for a full minute, heart racing. Then I saw the next page. A signed authorization transferring funds from a family trust into the purchase. The signature was mine, or it was supposed to be. But the slant of the D was wrong. The curl on the final A didn't match. I knew my own signature. This one wasn't it. I flipped through the attached banking activity. Quiet fund transfers, slow and methodical. It hadn't just happened once. There were at least 3 other transactions over the past 5 years using my name. My identity. My approval. Except I'd never seen them. Never signed. Never known they existed. I sat back on my heels, the room spinning gently. It wasn't just that they had hidden something. They'd used me. They'd built a second version of my life. One where I owned things I didn't know about. Where I was a participant in plans I was never told existed. In that moment, I understood something I'd never quite let myself believe. It wasn't that they didn't see me. It was that they had seen me, fully, and decided I was a tool. Someone quiet, capable, not worth consulting. I put everything back exactly how I found it. Slid the envelope into its folder, pressed the file cabinet closed, and eased the door shut behind me. My hands didn't stop shaking until I was halfway down the hall. The next morning at breakfast, Linda poured my coffee with her usual chirpy performance. She asked if I'd found any real job leads lately, then launched into a 10-minute monologue about Eliza's podcast concept. Something about authenticity and crystal healing. Gerald didn't look up from his toast. I smiled and nodded, playing my role. But inside, something had shifted. By noon I was packed and ready to leave. I told them I had a project due. They nodded, thanked me for helping with the attic, and reminded me to call more often. The drive back to Portland was 5 hours of silence, except for the occasional GPS reminder and the hum of my own disbelief. The moment I walked through my front door, I pulled every financial document I had. Credit reports, bank accounts, anything that might hold a clue. It didn't take long. The cabin in Grand Haven was real. The trust it came from was real. It had been funded through a financial entity tied directly to my Social Security number. The signature on file had legally passed, but only because no one had looked close enough. But that was only the beginning. As I traced the paper trail, it became clear that I'd unknowingly funded parts of Eliza's skincare startup. Transfers labeled under joint family equity, rerouted through overlapping accounts. The lake house my parents loved so much. Mortgaged 3 years ago to cover the deficit after Eliza's launch tanked. The entire financial structure of our family had been patched together with quiet approvals and forged names. Mine included. It was all so absurd it almost felt comedic, if betrayal could ever be funny. I didn't want revenge. I wasn't even sure I wanted an apology. But I wanted clarity, and I wanted control. So I called Sienna, an old friend from college who'd built her reputation quietly and effectively dismantling estates for high-profile families. I didn't tell her everything, just the facts, laid out in tidy order, like I was reading someone else's story out loud, unsure where it started or what genre it belonged to. She called me 2 days later, her voice calm, but her words razor-sharp. If you wanted to pursue fraud, you'd have a case. But that's not what you want. She was right. I didn't want a courtroom. I wanted something cleaner, more permanent. And so we started digging. Quietly, carefully. The plan unfolded slowly, like thawing ice. Nothing sudden, nothing loud, just pressure building. Sienna worked behind the scenes, quietly reaching out to a network of legal contacts she trusted more than family. Everything had to be precise. We weren't just dealing with paperwork. We were unraveling a pattern of deception designed to go unnoticed because it looked so normal. On paper, I was wealthier than I ever imagined. Not wildly rich, but significantly better off than I thought. The cabin in Grand Haven wasn't just some abandoned lake house. It had appreciated in value, sitting quietly under my name for years. There was a small investment account I'd never opened, seeded with funds from the same trust that had purchased the house. More than that, parts of a holding company had been shifted in my direction. The family had used it to funnel money into Eliza's doomed skincare line, and pieces of it had somehow landed in my name. Likely for tax purposes, possibly by accident, but maybe not. The details were maddening. They'd mortgaged their beloved lake house 3 years earlier, quietly, to help fund Eliza's company. They'd done it behind closed doors, assuming they could cover the damage before anyone noticed. Gerald probably thought he could juggle the debt until a return came through. But there was no return. By the time I found the deed, the bank had already begun the foreclosure process. Sienna was the one who came up with the idea. "You could buy it," she said over the phone one afternoon, calm as if discussing groceries. "Not as you, of course. That would cause unnecessary drama. But if you use a holding company, a shell LLC with no obvious ties, you could purchase it legally and cleanly." I didn't hesitate. For once, I didn't second guess. I just said yes. The paperwork took weeks. Sienna arranged the structure, used a proxy as the buyer, and ensured that every step was airtight. I signed documents under an alias registered through the state, watched the process from a distance, and never breathed a word of it to anyone. Then, one gray Tuesday, I held the deed to the lake house in my hands. My name wasn't printed in bold letters on the front. That wasn't the point. What mattered was that it belonged to me now. It was legal, irreversible, and entirely mine. No one had given it to me. No one had told me I deserved it. I took it, quietly, methodically. It wasn't about the property. It wasn't even about the lie. It was about finally doing something that broke the pattern, that said, without apology, "I am not the person you think I am." Linda kept texting that fall, asking if I'd be home for Christmas, if I could bring dessert, if I'd heard Eliza's podcast yet. Gerald sent another job listing in an email titled "Something with Stability." I didn't reply. I didn't even open the links. Their world hadn't shifted yet. They still thought I lived inside it. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. Not my friends. Not Sienna, beyond the necessary logistics. I kept it to myself because silence, when it's intentional, has a different weight. It doesn't shrink you. It steadies you. It gives you space to breathe without defending yourself. The lake house was scheduled to change ownership in mid-December. The final signatures were processed remotely, quietly. Gerald never noticed. He was too busy managing a narrative that no longer matched reality. Eliza was knee-deep in some new influencer deal with a vegan beauty brand, and Linda had started dropping hints that she wanted a big family moment for Christmas. Maybe a slideshow, maybe even a toast. I nodded through the calls. I said I'd be there. And I would be. Not for them, but for something else. For clarity. For closure. For the quietest kind of confrontation. The kind you don't shout, because the truth already echoes loud enough. On Christmas morning, I arrived early. The driveway was still edged with snow, and the front steps were lined with flickering plastic candles that Linda insisted added holiday magic. Inside, the cinnamon rolls were already burning on the edges, and Gerald had lit the fireplace even though it was 73 degrees indoors. It was like stepping into a memory that refused to evolve. Eliza was already there, dressed in another pastel lounge set, this one lilac and dripping in matching accessories. She was filming part of the morning on her phone, smiling at herself through the lens, adjusting the angles until her cheekbones caught the light just right. I placed one box under the tree. Plain white. No ribbon. No tag. Just a single envelope inside. Then I sat and watched the holiday machine start up again. Linda's dramatic hugs, Gerald's forced chuckles, Eliza's practiced gasps as she opened a luxury handbag she'd probably picked out herself. They toasted to new chapters, dream homes, and Eliza's upcoming rebrand. I sipped my coffee, nodded at the right times, and waited. Finally, I picked up the white box and handed it to Gerald. "It's for you," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Thought you might want to open it before the end of the day." He took it with a small smile, expecting socks or maybe a book. He peeled the lid slowly, not out of caution, but because he assumed it didn't matter. Then he saw the envelope. Wax sealed. Real paper. Real weight. He hesitated before breaking the seal, as if some part of him already knew. He opened the letter, unfolded the documents, and read the first page. It took him a moment to register what it was. The notarized deed. The purchase confirmation. The shell company name. The lake house address. His name, absent. Mine, present. He didn't speak. He turned to the second page, slower now. There it was, the forgery. My signature compared side by side with the one they'd used. The warning notice from my attorney. The paragraph stating the purchase was legal and complete. The final line clarifying ownership, current deed holder, holding LLC, registered to Darla, no last name. Effective immediately. His hands trembled slightly. Just slightly. But I saw it. Linda leaned over, still smiling, not understanding yet. "What is it?" she asked. "What's going on?" She read the top of the document. Her smile faded so fast, it looked like a candle blown out mid-sentence. She turned to me, blinking. "Darla, what is this?" I met her eyes and said, without flinching, "It's exactly what it looks like." Eliza froze mid-sip. Gerald didn't speak. Linda's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Her voice cracked, not loud, not theatrical. Just a break, quiet and final. "You didn't tell me," she whispered, turning to Gerald. It wasn't a question. He still didn't speak. Eliza looked from face to face, clutching her new handbag like it might protect her from the truth unfolding around her. No one moved. No one explained. The silence grew thick and slow, like syrup on the carpet, impossible to clean without ripping everything up. I stood slowly, adjusted my sweater, smoothed the front of my jeans. My voice was calm, detached, but deliberate. "I won't be sharing the lake house. Not this time." No one replied. Not a word. I stood in that living room for maybe 30 more seconds, but it felt longer, long enough for the shock to settle, for the tension to soak into the walls, for each of them to understand what they'd just seen. Not one of them moved. Not one word came out of Gerald's mouth. The papers in his hands stayed still, clenched just tight enough to wrinkle the corners, but not enough to tear. Linda looked like she was trying to swallow glass, blinking so fast I thought she might disappear behind her own confusion. The silence wasn't dramatic. It was destructive, the kind of silence that sinks into the floorboards and rots things from the inside out. It wasn't the kind of moment where someone stands and makes a speech or cries and begs for forgiveness. This was the kind of moment that breaks something unspoken, something that never really had a name but always had a weight. Linda kept staring at Gerald, and in her eyes, I saw something more than betrayal. It was a collapse. Not of marriage, necessarily, but of the version of their lives she had carefully curated for decades. It shattered in real time right there in front of the fake fireplace and the matching monogram stockings. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here. Not like this. But it had. And now she had to decide if she was going to acknowledge it or keep playing her role. Eliza still hadn't said anything. She sat perfectly still on the edge of the couch, legs crossed like she was modeling for a holiday magazine, but her face had frozen completely. No Instagram smile. No influencer tone. Just wide eyes and confusion, as if someone had handed her a book in a language she'd never seen. She looked from me to Gerald, then back to Linda, and I realized then she truly hadn't known. Not about the forgery. Not about the trust. Not about any of it. Maybe that was the worst part. Maybe they'd kept her in the dark too, built a fantasy around her so carefully that even she believed it. She'd never had to ask questions because everything was handed to her with applause and gift wrap. And me? I'd spent my entire life being handed instructions instead of affection, utility instead of celebration. It wasn't just unfair, it was intentional. I turned toward the door, not slowly, not dramatically, just purposefully. I paused before leaving, not to make a scene, not to deliver a final line. I just wanted to see their faces one last time, unfiltered and unguarded. Gerald was still staring at the documents, eyes hollow and unfocused like he could rewrite them if he stared long enough. Linda was motionless, lips parted like she might ask something but had forgotten how. Eliza sat small, no longer the star of the room, her hands curled into her lap like she was afraid to touch anything that might break. I reached for my coat and shrugged it on, each movement clean and quiet. No one said goodbye. No one tried to stop me. That was the most honest part. At the door, I said the only thing that felt necessary. "Just so we're clear," I said, my voice low but firm, "I won't be giving it back. Not the house. Not my name. Not anymore." I opened the door and stepped into the cold. The air hit my face like truth, sharp, honest, clean in a way the inside of that house had never been. I walked to my car slowly, not because I was stalling, but because it felt good to move without performance, without pretense. The snow had started falling again, soft and slow, covering everything with a kind of quiet that felt deserved. By the time I reached the lake house, my lake house, the wind had picked up, and the trees were swaying gently, whispering things I finally had time to hear. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and dropped my bag on the floor. No music, no TV, just the creak of the old wood settling into winter and the faint ticking of the thermostat trying to remember how to work. The place wasn't perfect. The floorboards needed refinishing. The chimney made weird sounds whenever the wind shifted. The bathroom faucet dripped just enough to be annoying. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that it was mine, not given, not borrowed, not stolen. Mine because I made it so. Because I found the lie, pulled the thread, and followed it until the entire fabric unraveled. I sat in the old armchair by the window, pulled a blanket over my legs, and let myself exhale. A full, real breath. One I hadn't taken in years. Not since I was a teenager learning how to disappear without actually leaving. Not since I'd realized that being the quiet one meant they'd expect me to carry everything they dropped. I didn't feel triumphant. That's not what this was. It wasn't revenge or glory. It was release. A slow, quiet letting go of a story I never asked to be part of. A story they kept writing around me, using my name in sentences I never got to read. I thought about calling someone. Sienna, maybe. Or a friend from work. Just to say it out loud. What I'd done, what I'd discovered, what I'd taken back. But the urge passed. Some victories don't need applause. Some healing doesn't need a witness. I didn't know if they'd reach out. If Linda would call with a voice full of half-truths and strategically timed regret. If Gerald would send another clipped article from a financial magazine pretending nothing had happened. If Eliza would send a meme or a throwback photo like we were still close. Maybe they would. Maybe they wouldn't. It didn't matter anymore. I wasn't waiting. This wasn't about burning bridges. It was about finally acknowledging the ones they built were never meant to carry me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was finished. Not with a scream. Not with a slam. Just with a line drawn cleanly across the part of my life where I'd once mistaken survival for belonging. The snow kept falling, steady and slow. The kind of snowfall that doesn't announce itself. It just arrives and covers everything, turning the sharpest edges soft. It blanketed the railings, the trees, the driveway, the lake's edge. Funny thing is, now that I finally owned the one thing they cherished most, the symbol of family, of legacy, of pride, I didn't even want it. Not really. I didn't want the house. I wanted the proof. Proof that I could take back what they thought I'd never notice missing. Proof that I saw what they did, and that I refused to keep playing the part they wrote for me. They took things from me for years. Little pieces. Patience. Celebration. Space. They called it love. I called it survival. 2 weeks passed without a single word from anyone, which told me more than any dramatic phone call ever could. I didn't expect an apology. I didn't even want one. But part of me had expected something, some messy attempt at damage control, a text laced with guilt, or maybe just confusion. Instead, the silence sat heavy and intact, like they had all quietly agreed to pretend none of it happened. Then, one morning, just as the last snowstorm of the year started dusting the lakefront, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name in the unmistakable tight, slanted handwriting that belonged to Gerald. My first instinct was to toss it into the fireplace, let it curl into ash without even knowing what it said. But something made me open it, curiosity, maybe, or just the habit of always being the one to clean up the mess. Inside was a personal check. The amount, $180,000. And beneath it, a short note written with the same clinical precision Gerald used when filling out forms. It read, "This was never meant for her. It was always meant for you. I couldn't protect you the way I should have. I'm sorry." I sat down at the kitchen table and read it 3 more times, as if the words might rearrange into something easier to believe. Gerald had never written me anything emotional in his life. Every birthday card he ever gave me had been signed with just his name. No message. No warmth. Just obligation in ink. But this was something else. Attached behind the check was a photocopy of a legal document I hadn't seen before. It outlined a trust formed 12 years ago under my name, funded quietly through his own accounts, originally intended as a financial cushion for Darla's future stability. Linda's signature appeared beside his, dated 3 years later, under a revision that diverted the funds to support a business development project, Eliza's brand. His signature was crisp. Hers was embellished. And mine? Not there at all. The second page was a recent filing. Gerald had filed for divorce 3 days after Christmas. I stared at that piece of paper until the snow outside blurred into white noise. For all his control and silence, for all the years he spent acting like I wasn't quite enough to invest in, Gerald had finally chosen a side. And it wasn't hers. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. It just settled into my bones like cold air through an open window, uncomfortable, but clarifying. I didn't deposit the check. Not right away. I tucked it back into the envelope, placed it in a drawer I rarely opened, and went outside to walk along the lake. The snow was deep enough to cover the ground fully, but soft enough to feel like it hadn't made up its mind yet. I walked until my lungs hurt from the cold and my thoughts started to still. That evening, as I poured myself a glass of wine and finally felt the tightness in my chest start to ease, my phone buzzed. It was Eliza. Just a meme. Something generic about siblings who grow up too different to understand each other. No words. No context. Just a pixelated cartoon and a broken heart emoji. I didn't respond. I wasn't going to try and decode a digital olive branch dressed as humor. If she had something to say, she could say it. Until then, she could keep her curated sadness and half-baked symbolism to herself. But that wasn't the last of it. 3 weeks later, I got a call from an old college roommate. "Are you seeing what's going on online?" she asked. I hadn't been on social media in days. When I logged into Instagram, it was already everywhere. Eliza had posted a statement. One of those long, swipe-through caption rants written in the Notes app and screenshotted like a public confession. It started with, "I just want to speak my truth." That was never a good sign. She wrote about betrayal, about how her safe space had been invaded, how certain people had weaponized legal systems to punish their own family. She never used my name. She didn't have to. The post was filled with vague spiritual language, references to narcissistic cycles, and more hashtags than I could count. She made herself the victim of a story she never once tried to understand. At the end, she linked a GoFundMe. The title, "Help Me Rebuild After Financial Abuse." The goal, $75,000. For therapy, moving expenses, and rebuilding my brand. I laughed out loud. I hadn't laughed that hard in months. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. The same woman who filmed every Christmas gift reveal like a brand deal now expected strangers to pay for the fallout of her own entitlement. And people were calling her out in the comments. They remembered the house key post. They remembered the videos with her dream space and designer furniture. I refreshed the page every few hours, watching the donations stall out at $400, most of them anonymous. And then the comments came pouring in. "Weren't you just bragging about that lake house a few months ago? Financial abuse. Or financial consequences. Sell one of your purses, Eliza. You'll be fine." I didn't engage. I didn't need to. She was unraveling herself in front of thousands of people, and every word only tightened the knot she'd tied. Meanwhile, the lake house was quiet. Peaceful. I replaced the faucet, cleaned out the shed, learned how to bleed the radiators. Nothing fancy. Nothing shareable. Just small, tangible proof that this was mine now. Not because anyone handed it to me, but because I took back what should have been mine all along. A month later, another envelope arrived. No name. No return address. Inside, a single Polaroid. Eliza, posing on a beach with a man I didn't recognize. They were holding hands. The caption on the back, written in faded ink, "Found what I deserved." No signature. No explanation. I placed it on the windowsill for a week before finally tossing it into the trash. Not because I was angry, because I was done. Eliza had built her life around performance, and she would always find a new stage. But I didn't need to watch anymore. Her drama wasn't mine. Not this time. And maybe that's the strangest part of all. The unexpected ending I never could have written for myself. I didn't win in the traditional sense. There was no parade. No public vindication. No trophy for surviving the kind of love that carves and calls it care. But I was free. Free of the script. Free of the noise. Free of the version of myself they tried to shape out of convenience. And sometimes that's all the resolution you get.